This week on Jerusalem Dateline, Jewish victims of the Paris terror attack are buried in Israel.
There's no word. There's no word. I can't tell you anything.
Plus, how Jews in France are responding to the attacks and rising anti-Semitism in their country by returning home to Israel. And he's an Arab and a Muslim, and he wants to see Islam reformed. Egypt's president calls on Islamic leaders to reject radicalism. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. 4 Jews who died in the Islamic terror attack in Paris came home to Israel this week. In a special ceremony, the Jewish state honored them and laid them to rest. Israel's leaders, including the Prime Minister, the President, and the Mayor of Jerusalem, paid respects to the family and friends of the victims.
This is not how we wanted you to arrive in the land of Israel. This is not how we wanted to see you come home to the state of Israel and to Jerusalem, its capital. We wanted you alive. We wanted for you life.
During the service, one rabbi read from Psalm 130, which says in part, "Out of the depths I cry unto you, O Lord." It reflected the feeling of many who came here to honor the dead.
There's no word. There's no word. I can't tell you anything. I'm just feeling pain and there's no word.
The Women's International Zionist Organization reported a rise of anti-Semitism around the world and in France.
We saw now that we can die because we are Jewish in France now, and this feeling is a really bad feeling. We are really sad for all the Jewish community.
Many feel the terror attacks will accelerate the immigration, known in Hebrew as Aliyah, of French Jews to Israel.
Indeed, this is our homeland, and as much as we can fear the rockets and the random acts of terror, it's the most safe place because we know that we are protected by the government, we are protected by each other, and Am Yisrael Chai.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the only true home, the one Jewish state and the hope of the Jewish people, is the land of Israel. It's his call for the Jews of France and the world to come home. The attack at the kosher market in Paris has deepened fears among Europe's Jewish communities about their future on the continent. The Paris murders came just months after deadly strikes on a Jewish museum in Belgium and a Jewish school in southwestern France. Leaders in Israel are encouraging European Jews to immigrate to the Jewish state. CBN News spoke to the director of the American Jewish Committee office in Paris, Simone Rodin Benzaken, about how the French government is responding to the attacks.
The reality is that the government has taken this already relatively seriously. Only a few months ago, the government passed the anti-jihad law in the French parliament. The government, the prime minister, just gave a speech at the parliament where he clearly stated that he wants new recommendations from the Minister of Interior in order to reinforce the arsenal in order to be able to combat this very, very dangerous threat to our society.
How can the government there protect the people, and especially Jews, as they go about their daily lives?
Well, they have already started to do this. The government has deployed more than 7,000 policemen on Jewish sites. It has reinforced security in front of Jewish schools, in front of synagogues. But it can't be enough. It can't only be that. If the perspective for the outlook for the Jewish community is to be basically living in some sort of prison, it can't be. This can't be a future. So it's obviously important. It's obviously reassuring for the Jewish community, but it can't be only that. Much more needs to be done. There need to be very clear measures that need to be taken in terms of counter-radicalization, in terms of working in prisons, because our prisons have become universities for jihad, in terms of also the education that we are doing in schools, and very profound questions that are being asked about our society in terms of integration, in terms of also the place that Islam is taking in our society, and basically making sure that French Muslims also can speak out against what is happening within their own community.
Israeli leaders have made it clear that French Jews are welcome in Israel. Simone, do you think many French and European Jews will decide it's time to leave?
It really depends on where we take it from now. There are definitely questions. I don't think I know one single Jew who doesn't ask himself or herself the question whether they have a future here in France. I, for my part, certainly are. I'm a mother of 2 children. I would not be a responsible parent if I didn't ask myself that question. But it really will depend on what the answer is. If the situation is exactly the same 1 year, 2 years from now, then I fear that the outlook for Jews in France, but actually for France in general, and probably even symbolically for democracies in the Western world, is very grim.
Even before the Paris terror attacks, soul-searching was happening within the Muslim world. The most vocal critic, Egyptian President al-Sisi, who issued a call for monumental change.
Egypt's president called for a revolution in Islam.
It has reached the point that this ideology is hostile to the entire world. Is it conceivable that 1.6 billion would kill the world's population of 7 billion so that they could live on their own? Let me say it again. We need to revolutionize our religion.
Sisi's speech highlighted an important debate going on inside Islam between those who want a more moderate Islam and groups like ISIS. The debate accelerated when ISIS began its brutal campaign.
According to the Quran and the Hadith, is exactly what ISIS is doing. Like in the time of Muhammad, the Prophet.
Former Israeli ambassador to Egypt, Zvi Mazel, says Sisi's speech to some of the foremost scholars in the Muslim world was unprecedented.
But here you have a president, the president of Egypt, the most important country in the Arab world. And he's telling them in their faces, listen, guys, you have to change.
And Sisi is not alone.
It's not just him. The king of Jordan, King Abdullah II, has taken the exact same approach, and actually over several years now, working both with moderate Muslim leaders to make theological statements and build a consensus, not just in Jordan, but throughout the Muslim world, that radical Islam is not the Islam that most Muslims want to practice.
It's unclear if the actions of these men will make any difference without help.
It's a battle right now for the soul of Islam. And the West needs to be encouraging, supporting, assisting any leader in the Muslim world who takes a proactive, moderate position.
Without that support, Islam could split into 2 directions, one that spreads terror as in Paris, and another that tries to make peace with itself and the world.
Coming up, they're the ISIS overcomers, 3 women who survived and escaped captivity by the Islamic State. Welcome back. In their bid for Middle East domination, ISIS terrorists have murdered, raped, and abused thousands of women in Syria and Iraq. Now some of these courageous survivors want to share their stories with the world. CBN International correspondent Gary Lane went to Iraq to talk with 3 women who stood up against the barbarity of ISIS.
This is the story of 3 women who suffered personal loss because of the war against ISIS. Each one has struggled to overcome their painful experiences. One is a soldier, another a young Yazidi, and another a Syrian refugee. After a summer of terror, ISIS is now on the defensive. Iraqi Kurds say American bombing raids have helped them beat back the advance.
American airstrikes have definitely had a devastating impact on Islamic State fighters. But there's one thing that they fear more than American bombs, and that's female Peshmerga fighters with guns.
Meet the women of the 2nd Battalion, a force guarding Iraqi Kurdistan. More than 500 women serve in this unit. Nasreen Hamlawa is the battalion's deputy commander.
These women are the best examples of Peshmerga. They are very brave women. When it comes to being a hero, there's no difference between men and women.
She's no stranger to war, fighting for years against Saddam Hussein and Iran. She convinced family members to join up, but that came with a fatal cost.
She was really good, a high example to the girls, very smart and brave. She gave herself as a sacrifice for the sake of Kurdistan.
Last fall, an ISIS sniper killed Nasreen's 26-year-old daughter, Rangan. She left behind a husband and 2 children.
The difficult part is my grandchildren. They miss their mom. Usually, when I see them, I cry.
Tears flowed as she spoke of her grandchildren growing up without their mother. Her pain seemed to ease as she proudly explained that her daughter gave her life for the homeland. Nasreen says she's more determined than ever to stop the kidnapping, selling, and sexually abusing of women.
If anyone should fight against ISIS, it should be the women.
This 22-year-old Yazidi woman, we'll call her Shanar, was one of thousands kidnapped by ISIS militants. It happened last August as many Yazidis fled to Sinjar Mountain to escape ISIS militants. They captured Shanar and put her with about 100 other Yazidi girls, some as young as 10 years old.
They were forcing the girls to convert to Islam and then marry ISIS members. They beat our legs, heads, and arms, demanding all of us to serve them or be used as sex slaves.
Shanar says ISIS fighters came to the house and offered the girls money for sex. Many of them were sold for as little as $1.
They were really determined to harm us. They abused us and took pleasure in it. Most of us wanted to die.
Some of the girls have attempted suicide to escape the abuse. An alarming number have succeeded. Last November, Shanar secretly contacted an uncle who helped rescue her, her young sister, and 5 other girls. Freedom, however, did not bring joy.
I didn't rejoice because even when I was rescued and was over the border inside Turkey, I realized that 27 of my family members were missing.
While she says life is difficult without them, Shanar says she's glad she at least helped some of the girls escape ISIS.
I helped them a lot, and I am very happy that I could help return the girls and my sister who were with me.
Hanifa escaped Syria after fighting between the Syrian government and the Islamic State destroyed her home. Once there, she landed a job with a Christian organization and started reading the Bible.
I learned a lot about Jesus. He's not just a normal human, he is God. He cleansed me of my sins. I was dead, and now I have a new life.
A miraculous healing caused Hanifa to leave Sunni Islam. Doctors had scheduled surgery to remove a life-threatening tumor, so she prayed the operation would be unnecessary. She says her doctor was surprised moments before the surgery when he discovered the tumor had miraculously disappeared.
The doctor kept saying, "It's impossible, it's impossible. Where's your tumor? What have you done?" I told him I just prayed to God. He said, "You are okay, that's impossible." But I didn't care what he thought because I knew God had healed me.
As a Christian, Hanifa's life is in jeopardy because she's considered an apostate.
It is dangerous for me, but Jesus is with me. He is God. He saved me, so He'll keep me safe.
Today, she organizes clothing and other items to distribute to those in need. As ISIS seeks to eradicate Christianity, Hanifa is trying to increase Christian numbers by sharing her testimony. She says she has a special burden for refugees from Kobani.
I tell them my story. I want the Kobani people to know Jesus.
Hanifa, Shanar, and Nasreen. 3 courageous women overcoming ISIS with guns, determination, and God's Word. Gary Lane, CBN News, Sulaymaniyah, Iraq.
Up next, a new film tackles the story of the Exodus. Was it a fable or is it a fact? Is the Bible a myth or is it fact? More than a decade ago, filmmaker Tim Mahoney started to document one of the Bible's biggest stories, the exodus of the Jewish people out of the land of Egypt. His investigation led to a personal crisis of faith and a compelling new documentary called Patterns of Evidence, The Exodus. Here's a look at the trailer.
I don't believe there was a single event that we can call the Exodus. So far, there is no documented evidence about the Exodus.
Exodus did not happen in the way that it is described in the text.
How can we prove that?
You look for a collapse in Egyptian civilization, and that's where you'll find Moses and the Exodus. If people are telling us that there was no Jericho at the time that Joshua conquered the Promised Land, why don't we ask the simple question, when was Jericho destroyed?
Do you think this is Joseph?
Either it is Joseph or it's somebody remarkably the same.
We have tombs that are clearly those of foreigners, Semites. We can tell this by the pottery, by the kind of weapons. These are not Egyptian-type daggers. They have donkeys in some cases buried with them. This was not an Egyptian practice.
This is real evidence.
Look at your evidence and come to a conclusion based on the evidence.
Patterns of evidence.
Well, Tim, it's great to be with you again. We were here many years ago in Jerusalem, and it's great to see that the film is finally being released to the public. Tell me exactly why you made this film.
The reason why we made this film was, there's a sort of a long explanation. I was actually thinking it was going to be quite simple, just searching for the route of the Exodus. And when I was involved with this, people said, well, why would you search for the route of the Exodus when there's no evidence that the Exodus ever really happened at all in Egypt? And that was quite a profound idea. I thought, well, what are you saying? So I actually went to the location where the events were supposed to happen in Goshen in the eastern delta, and went to the archaeological sites, and that's what I was told, that there was no evidence for the Exodus. And that began this 12-year journey of mine, actually a little bit of a crisis of faith for me, because I came home from that first trip to Egypt startled by that, but decided to continue on with this investigation. And that's how this film, Patterns of Evidence, came to be.
Well, it sounds like there's a lot of history, archaeology, and it's a bit of a mystery thriller as well. What were the things that surprised you as you went through your own crisis of faith and then made your investigation?
Well, I think that what I started to see was that there's this idea that Ramesses is the Pharaoh of the Exodus, and I think that happens in a particular time of history. And when everyone looks at that particular time, they're actually correct that there is no evidence for the Exodus. But other archaeologists and Egyptologists were saying, but wait a minute, there are evidences that are earlier than Ramesses that match this story. And so what I did as a filmmaker was to start to look at that as we gathered more and more pieces of information and interviews. We gathered that and we started to see that there was a mosaic that was happening, that there were patterns that were starting to show. And we looked at the Bible and we treated it just as a historical document. And we started to say, well, what does the Bible say and what does this evidence look like? And eventually that's how we were able to put those patterns of evidence together, so we kind of overlap them with the biblical story.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think is the main significance, the importance of your film?
Well, one of the most important things is that up until now, for the last 50, 60, 70 years, people have been very critical of the Bible. And they said, you know, there just is no evidence. And if the story of the Exodus isn't true, then what Jesus Christ said and the apostles about Moses and the Exodus and what the Apostle Paul said, then those statements are false. Because if there was no Exodus, then it starts to collapse the whole story. The whole Bible has a foundation within this story of the Exodus. What this film does, I think, which is, I believe it's profound, is that it actually shows where the pattern of evidence is, and that, I think, has never been done before.
So how valuable can this be to pastors as they teach from the Old Testament?
Well, a lot of young people today don't buy because the Bible tells me so. That's not enough for them. And this material here, I think, actually helps people who have a scientific mind, who want to have more sophisticated answers than just the Bible tells me so. There's a line in the film that faith and science are both pursuing truth. And I think the pursuit of truth here is what this film is about.
I would agree, Tim. I've seen the film, and it is stunning, and I would encourage everybody to see it. It's great to be with you, and hope to see you back here sometime in Jerusalem. Coming up, it could earn a spot in the Guinness Book of World Records. the world's smallest New Testament, the Nano Bible. You may have heard about the Lord's Prayer engraved on the head of a pin. Now an Israeli company says it's created the smallest New Testament in the world. CBN correspondent Julie Stahl has that story.
It's called the Nano Bible.
All 27 books of the New Testament were printed in a less than 5mm square chip.
David Almog is one of the creators who came up with the idea.
We thought about this idea of and a vision to create something incorporating the nanotechnology that already exists in Israel and basically spreading the vision that we have for what it means to have the Bible close to you.
CBN News suited up to enter the sterile environment in the northern Israel laboratory where the chips are produced. Russell Elwanger is CEO of Tower Jazz, the semiconductor foundry making the chip.
Within the manufacturing processes at Tower Jazz, we have anywhere from 500 to 900 processing steps. What is processed is what's called a silicon substrate, which is any one of these 25 slices in this box. Every one of these boxes goes through its own specific processing flow.
Using cutting-edge technology, they print the mini Bibles in the original Greek text. Greek scholar Jack Pastor read from the chip with the help of a computer.
This is the part where Matthew is going through the genealogy of both the Jews and of Christ. There's no question that this is the text of the New Testament.
And we have about over 1,000 books on this 8-inch silicon wafer.
The tiny chips are currently made in Dependence, and in the future they'll be crafted into other jewelry.
We think that something like that can have such a positive impact on people's lives wherever they live.
I think it's a very, very nice activity. I think for people that are believers in the New Testament, it gives a very nice reminder that can be worn as cufflinks, can be worn as a pendant around one's neck.
Jerusalem Nano Bible submitted the miniature scriptures to the Guinness Book of World Records. They believe they'll soon hold the record for the tiniest New Testament in the world. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Migdal HaEmek, Israel.
Whether it's the Nano Bible, the story of the Exodus, or the ongoing fulfillment of the prophecies from the Bible, God's Word is alive and active. Well, that's it for this edition. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you right here next week on Jerusalem Dateline.